How much does a single fighter jet delivery really change Europe's balance of power when it arrives quietly, without headlines, but lands directly on NATO's eastern edge? In January 2026, Belarus confirmed the arrival of a new batch of Russian-built Su-30SM2 fighters, aircraft designed not just to fly but to extend deterrence hundreds of kilometers beyond national borders. What this transfer ultimately signals, however, remains unresolved. If this development escalates, it reshapes air power calculations across Eastern Europe. If it stabilizes, it locks in a new status quo built on layered air defense rather than numerical parity. And if it fails, Belarus risks becoming a liability rather than a shield in a region already saturated with military force. The outcome matters because Belarus sits at the intersection of Russian strategic depth and NATO's forward presence, where changes in air capability translate directly into deterrence thresholds. To understand why these aircraft matter, you need to step back into Belarus's military history and geography. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Belarus has remained Moscow's closest military partner in Europe, integrated through the Union State framework and shared air defense arrangements. Unlike Ukraine or the Baltic states, Minsk never pursued defense independence. Instead, it positioned itself as a forward buffer, trading sovereignty in procurement and doctrine for security guarantees and subsidized access to Russian weapon systems. For decades, the Belarusian Air Force relied almost entirely on Soviet-era MiG-29 fighters. While advanced in the early 1980s, those aircraft became increasingly obsolete as modern combat shifted toward long-range sensors beyond visual-range missiles and networked warfare. Their limited range and narrow mission profile left Belarus dependent on ground-based air defenses rather than offensive or sustained air patrol capability. That began to change with the introduction of the Su-30SM. Belarus signed only one confirmed contract, a $600 million deal for 12 aircraft, averaging roughly $50 million per jet. Deliveries began in the early 2020s, transforming the Air Force from a short-range interceptor fleet into one capable of extended patrols, multi-role missions, and coordinated operations with Russian forces. The latest delivery pushes that transformation further. The Su-30SM2 is not a cosmetic upgrade. It integrates the AL-41F1S engine, originally developed for Russia's Su-35 air superiority fighter. This engine provides higher thrust, improved fuel efficiency, and three-dimensional thrust vectoring, dramatically increasing maneuverability and range. In practical terms, it allows the aircraft to remain airborne longer, carry heavier payloads, and generate surplus power for advanced onboard systems. Radar capability is central here. The Su-30 family carries one of the largest fighter-mounted radars in service anywhere in Europe, estimated at roughly 3 times the size of the radar used by NATO's F-35. Size alone does not determine effectiveness, but it does translate into detection range and tracking capacity, particularly when operating within friendly airspace protected by layered surface-to-air missile systems. Belarus does not need numerical parity with NATO air forces to complicate their planning. Its strategy is defensive and asymmetric. The country operates one of the densest integrated air defense networks in the region, centered on the Russian-supplied S-400 system. In wartime scenarios, Belarusian fighters are expected to operate under this protective umbrella, extending sensor coverage, intercepting high-value targets, and escorting strategic assets, rather than seeking air superiority through attrition. The exact number of Su-30s in Belarusian service remains unclear. Estimates suggest around 20 aircraft, but it is possible that some of the newly delivered jets are modernized airframes returning after upgrades rather than entirely new builds. What matters more than the count is the capability concentration. Each Su-30SM2 represents a significant leap over the MiG-29s they replace, both in endurance and mission flexibility. This shift must also be understood in the context of regional air power attrition since 2022. Ukraine inherited Soviet Su-27 fighters but struggled to modernize them, and training standards declined over time. During 4 years of high-intensity conflict, most of that fleet was destroyed. Belarus, by contrast, retired its Su-27s earlier due to high operating costs and avoided exposure to combat losses, preserving resources for selective modernization. Now consider a first what-if scenario. If NATO expands its forward air deployments in response to Belarus's upgrades, the region risks entering a cycle of reciprocal reinforcement. More aircraft, more air defense systems, and tighter reaction timelines increase the probability of miscalculation, especially during exercises or patrol intercepts near borders. A second scenario runs in the opposite direction. If Belarus's enhanced air force successfully deters incursions without provoking escalation, it reinforces a model where smaller states rely on high-capability platforms integrated into broader defense networks rather than mass. This approach prioritizes survivability and denial over power projection, aligning closely with Russian military doctrine. Globally, the implications extend beyond Belarus. The Su-30SM2 demonstrates Russia's ability to continue producing and exporting high-value combat aircraft despite sanctions and wartime losses. Alongside deliveries of Mi-35 helicopters, Iskander-M ballistic missiles, Oreshnik intermediate-range systems, and S-400 air defenses, it signals that Moscow is prioritizing quality and strategic reach over volume. At the same time, Belarus remains heavily outnumbered by NATO air forces along its borders. Poland, the Baltic states, and forward-deployed alliance units field far larger fleets. The Su-30SM2 does not change that imbalance. What it changes is the cost of operating near Belarusian airspace, particularly when aircraft must account for long-range detection and overlapping missile coverage. As the aircraft enter service, their role will likely remain tightly controlled, focused on airspace protection, bomber escort missions, and joint exercises with Russian strategic aviation. They are not instruments of surprise, but tools of persistence, designed to signal readiness without crossing thresholds. In the end, this delivery is less about celebration than calibration. It reflects how modern power is exercised quietly, through range, sensors, and integration rather than dramatic force movements. What viewers should watch next is not just how many aircraft Belarus fields, but how often they fly, where they patrol, and how neighboring states respond. In that rhythm lies the difference between stability maintained and tension compounded.